Welcome back, everybody. Our next presenter is Peter Davenport. Peter is the National UFO Reporting Center. No, I said Peter is. Yes. People call up the National UFO Reporting Center. Wow, this must be pretty big. Wow, this must be a big staff. This must be a whole bunch of investigators waiting to take my report. It's Peter, guys. It's Peter. He is a regular on Coast to Coast and Jeff Renz. You hear him there frequently giving updates on sightings from around the country. But think about the work he's been doing for 15 years now, tirelessly. Guy puts in, I don't know if he ever sleeps, okay? You can call the phone there almost any time, and he actually answers it and takes your report. And he's been chronicling and documenting UFO reports all over the country for all of this time. And why does he do this? Fame and glory? No. Making a lot of money? No. By the way, if any of you are inclined to support the center with a small donation, he would welcome that with open arms. He does it for us and for the future generations that will try to get to the truth about what is going on. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Peter Davenport.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Bob, and to all of his wonderful staff who've been so wonderful to all of us speakers. It is more than just a delight to be here. I consider it to be high honor to be a part of this conference. It's high honor, in my opinion, to be able to appear before all of you, ladies and gentlemen, who've been so generous enough to take a bit of your time and treasury to be here at this conference, probably the best conference in the world. It is really exciting to me, and most of all, Bob is correct. I spend almost every waking hour from wake up to lights out 7 days a week collecting UFO data. I don't know why. That is a bigger question for me than the question of whether UFOs are real or not, actually. But in a, thank you. Thank you very much. But in a more serious vein, I believe we're dealing with a real phenomenon. If it is real, it is the greatest scientific question that has ever confronted man. That is, are we alone in this galaxy or universe, or are we not? The clear-cut answer to that question from my vantage point, and that will be the core of my presentation this morning, the clear answer to that question as to whether we are alone or not is that we are not. And we are visited, it appears to me, on a regular basis, certainly weekly, and my suspicion is that we are visited possibly daily. The only remaining question is whether there is a permanent alien presence on our planet. I have a couple programs today. I actually, when I make a presentation like this, I anguish over what I should present. Because for 61 and a half years, we ufologists have been capitalizing on just reporting sightings, generally hearsay, every once in a while photographic evidence, every once in a while we get radar evidence. But by and large, most of what we've done over the last 61 and a half years, since June 24th, 1947, Ken Arnold sighting over the Cascade Mountains up near my home in the state of Washington, has been eyewitness accounts. When I make a presentation, I like to bring not only the best material I have, but in some cases the most recent evidence I have. And that will constitute about the first 40 minutes of my presentation today. But somehow, some way, hopefully in the near future, ufology has to break out of this vicious circle. We've got to start analyzing the data better than we have in the past, and we've got to come up with some mechanism which allows us to accumulate or collect data that is not just hearsay or eyewitness evidence, and that will constitute the last 20 minutes of my presentation. Now, it is a bit of a coincidence that I should be speaking today. This is my third appearance at the conference. My first two were in 1999 and 2000, and today is the 10th anniversary of a very dramatic UFO sighting that occurred during the banquet in 1999. That was the banquet at which Lloyd Pye, I believe I'm correct in saying, first introduced his Star Child case, which he's developed very nicely since then. 10 years ago tonight. And I feel very comfortable with that statement because I know there are about a half a dozen people here in this audience who saw those objects with me. Terry Burris from up in my territory, state of Washington. Roger Lear was there, Peter Gersten, and 3 or 4 or 5 other people. I know that because we talked about this at the bar on Tuesday night of this week, and because of what happened there at the bar, I sort of vaguely recall this conversation. But in any event, it is very, very flattering to be invited to this conference. Now, in a moment, I'm going to start playing some slides. In the course of my presentation, I'm going to play 6 snippets, video clips, of what I consider to be the best video that certainly I have. I estimate that out of 10,000 photographs or video clips that are sent to the National UFO Reporting Center, perhaps one of them, 1 out of 10,000, is reliable enough, convincing enough, cogent enough, well documented enough for me to be able to say that is almost certainly an alien ship. But I will be playing some video clips today here that I think are really very interesting, and I'll be interested to get some feedback from you to see what you folks think. I have a couple, during this first 40-minute presentation, I have a couple things that I would like to do. I like to disabuse people of their even strongly held biases. Now, many people say, particularly skeptics, probably not many of you in this audience, say, well, if there are so many UFOs, as you say, Peter, why do astronomers not see them? Well, I think I can answer that question with some of these slides and an article that was published in June of 1960. The other question is, why does the press not cover this? Many people say, well, if there was many UFO sightings as you say, the press would certainly be on top of it, would it not? And I will show you some incidents where it appears to me that the press actually, for some reason not known to me, resisted covering very, very good UFO cases. The Phoenix Lights, which Lynn Katai covered last hour so very, very nicely, is an example of that. Also, and this is almost trite because so many speakers have addressed this issue in the course of the conference, many skeptics say, well, if UFOs were here, certainly the government would let us know, would it not? Thank you. I knew I was among friends. The last 20 minutes of my presentation. The first 40 will be dedicated to some of the most dramatic, well-documented, well-corroborated cases that I have been able to collect and assemble over the last 15 years during my tenure as director of the National UFO Reporting Center. If somebody would help me, maybe Terry Burris, I know him well, reliable chap. When there are about 20 minutes remaining in my allotted hour, I wonder if somebody would stand up. I have a clock here, but every once in a while I forget to look at the clock. Somebody say, hey Peter, you've got 20 minutes remaining. Because at that point I will shift into the second portion of my presentation to address what I consider to be one of only 2 really significant, unique intellectual contributions to my community. I believe the day in which government will monopolize all of the important information that they have collected with their intelligence sensors and satellites, the days are numbered that the government will be able to monopolize this field, and I will be discussing a proposal that I have made over the last 15 years to build what is known as a passive radar system to allow us civilians, us ufologists, the American people with capital letters, to satisfy to their own satisfaction, satisfy themselves that we are onto something real. With that, let me launch into the first part of my presentation. Let me give you a little background on me. It's very important to me that you recognize that I haven't always been a UFO investigator. That's what home used to look like for me. That's eastern Ethiopia, out east of Addis Ababa. 1962, 63, when I was a kid, I used to live in Ethiopia. That is a slightly younger Peter B. Davenport. That's in April of 1963. Of course, you can tell me because of the American-style blue jeans. It was a wonderful experience. Many years later, I, thanks to the U.S. Army, became a Russian translator. I've been a Russian translator for the last roughly 41 years. And in 1976, when I was a graduate student studying genetics and biochemistry at the University of Washington, I was sent out on a Russian fishing vessel. I was the first American scientist ever aboard a Russian fishing vessel. This is the 30th of June, 1976, that I was taken out by the Coast Guard, and for the next 18 days, I worked aboard the ship that you see there. This is the 4th of July, 1976. A significant day in the history of the United States, of course, when all of you were watching the tall ships in Boston Harbor for our bicentennial. I was out on this Russian vessel, and my Soviet hosts were so considerate. They recognized the significance of that day to an American. They shut down the ship for a 24-hour period in honor of the Americans' bicentennial. That is I on the right with the chief engineer in the center and so on. At the end of my tour, it got a little bit dicey. They put me under arrest. They told me they were going to shoot me and dump me overboard for refusing to sign their documents. I was hoping it was one of those, it wasn't one of those non-negotiable points, and indeed I did not sign the documents. I told them they could do what they wished, and fortunately, thanks to the U.S. Coast Guard, I got off that vessel. Well, my interest in UFOs started very, very early. I saw a UFO as a lad in July of 1954. I was 6 years of age at the time. I believe the date was the 17th of July. I was at a drive-in theater with my mother, my older brother in the back seat of a 1953 Studebaker. I observe that some of you may be just old enough to remember what a 53 Studebaker looked like. That was our family car. We had the overdrive version, by the way. And at the St. Louis airport, we saw an object that was witnessed by thousands of other people across St. Louis, made the newspapers. The color red of a red traffic signal, it was a very, very dramatic sighting. But my first article is what you see on the screen. I graduated from high school in Derry, New Hampshire. Quite a well-known town, actually. It was the home of Alan Shepard. It was also the home of the poet Robert Frost, who taught at the academy from which I graduated. And that summer, 1965, the incident at Exeter occurred on the 3rd of September of that year. I worked for the Derry News, the newspaper that published my article, and I and the editor, Mr. Conrad Quimby, who, by the way, was a close friend of Barney Hill. He knew Barney up in Portsmouth, held him in very, very high regard. And when the incident at Exeter was published, the incident there was published in the Manchester Union Leader, my editor said, "Peter, you're no longer a broom pusher, you are now a cub reporter," and he sent me up there. One of the more recent articles about my work and about me appeared on the front page of the LA Times on the 28th of March last year, 2008, on a Friday. I had a bureau chief actually contact me. He had contacted me some 6 months earlier, and he said, "Peter, I want to come out to your site, to your UFO center, and observe your work for 5 days. And I said, Thomas, I don't have 5 days to share with a journalist. And we negotiated over 6 months. Finally, he came out. He wrote this article, which appeared, again, March 28th of last year, one of the best articles that's ever been done on my work, in my opinion. Did a magnificent job. That yellow structure, by the way, is part of the missile site that I purchased 3 years ago, and I'm still cleaning up. That's down in the missile room. You're looking at the first ICBM missile base that the U.S. Air Force ever owned or operated. That's what I own, and my ultimate goal was to live there, but so far I haven't made that decision. I still live in the town of Harrington and go out to the missile site and work on it. This is Mr. Robert Gribble and his wife Gloria from Seattle. I show this slide because Bob Gribble was the founder of the National UFO Reporting Center, and he ran it for 20 years. In July of 1994, I heard by the grapevine that Bob was considering, after 20 years of having done that job, closing it up, and I made the mistake of calling him and saying, Bob, you know, I would be willing to come aboard and help you to take a bit of the load off your shoulders. And he said, Peter, it's yours. To be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, as flattered as I am to be your servant in this narrow respect of ufology, I wish I had never heard of a UFO. And I wish that I had not made that call and made that decision. But within a month, the hotline was hooked up at my apartment, and I was, initially, I thought that it would be a job that would have me taking 1, 2, or perhaps as many as 3 calls per week. Within 3 days, I was taking calls at a rate of 1, 2, or 3 dozen calls per day. And I panicked because this was a job I could immediately see that was going to smother me, dominate my life, and completely re-engineer the way I lived. And indeed, that happened. But my intellectual interest in this subject, and after all, it is the greatest scientific subject that has ever faced us. These are few of the people who have worked on the hotline in years and decades past. This gentleman in the black shirt is Christian Stepien, webmaster for the National UFO Reporting Center. Seattle Space Needle, popular icon, recognized around the world. How many of you knew that the top of it, that this whole thing was designed, patterned after a UFO? Designed in 13 Coins Restaurant by Mr. Eddie Carlson, later to become the chairman of United Airlines and Westin Hotels, and it commemorates the very well-known event, what is called the first sighting of UFOs on June 24th, 1947, over the Cascades by Ken Arnold. But in point of fact, we ufologists who do research have become convinced that it started long before 1947. I say that because of this document. Some of you may know of this. This is published by the federal government. It is a training manual for fire and disaster officers, people who respond to disasters. And if you were to turn to, obviously, Chapter 13 is what they gave us ufologists, no surprise there. They talk, this is just the first page of that, they talk about the famous event that occurred on the morning of February 26th, 1942 over Los Angeles, and they go on in this chapter to describe what emergency preparedness officers and first responders should be prepared for in the event of a UFO catastrophe of some kind. So on one hand, we have the U.S. government telling you and me that no, UFOs don't exist, couldn't possibly be. We would tell you if they did. On the other hand, they publish a training manual that admits Do we have to get like the lights out last night? This is the second conference I've been at where the power has failed. Now I can say I've been at one where the mic has failed. This is a very interesting article published in June of 1960 in Sky and Telescope. It is written by a NASA engineer, John O'Keefe, and he talks about an incident that occurred over Canada and over New England, as well as over the North Atlantic. It was a very interesting incident. A group of astronomers at the University of Toronto were standing out one night, and they saw, coming from the northwest, a cluster of lights. Looked something like that. And they were flabbergasted by it. In fact, they were so flabbergasted that this is a painting that hangs, I'm told, in the University of Toronto, commemorating and documenting that event. They saw a symmetrically arranged group of lights in a cluster, streaming tails out behind them, moving across the night sky at a slow procession. Obviously not satellites, obviously not aircraft, obviously not meteors, and this occurred on February 9th, 1913, before the First World War. The ground track of the objects was about here. After that first cluster of lights was seen by these astronomers, somebody looked to the west and said, "Good heavens, here comes another cluster, and another cluster, and another cluster." Then there was a large silver-colored object in the midst of them, followed by another cluster, and another cluster. 1913, February. This is a recreation by the author. They found references to this event in the towns and newspapers indicated along this line, and the event was recorded by ships at sea in the North Atlantic. Well, it goes even earlier than 1913. This is a very interesting article. It appears in the Tacoma newspaper on the 4th or the 2nd of July, 1893. It describes briefly, maybe not so briefly, a very dramatic incident that occurred on Puget Sound up near Seattle. A group of men went out on a sailing vessel to an island in Puget Sound to go trout fishing over the 4th of July weekend. They sailed out on the 1st of July. The next morning, while it's still dark, they were all awakened together with another group of gentlemen camped in a nearby camp by a shrieking, very bright sound, or very loud sound, and very bright strobing lights. They all got out from under their blankets and were flabbergasted by the object they saw before them that was hovering motionless over Puget Sound, over salt water. One of the men walked down to the beach to get closer to the object, and it spat out a bolt of what they called light water, or water, struck the man in the chest, blew him back down on the beach, and rendered him unconscious. It gets very interesting down in this portion of the article, because they say they reported to the newspaper that they couldn't tell when the incident had happened precisely because all of their pocket watches had stopped at the same time. So they were not absolutely sure what had occurred there. There's a blow-up of the headline. It talks about Mr. McDonald struck senseless in attempting to rescue the first person who had been struck by the water spat out by this object. Well, it goes back further still. My handball opponent at the University of Washington for many, many years was Dr. David Connectes. He was the chairman of Asian languages at the University of Washington in Seattle, where I used to teach for a while. He was a total skeptic on UFOs. But one day on the handball court, he came up to me and he said, "Peter," he said, "you know I'm a skeptic about this UFO phenomenon, but I am translating an ancient Chinese text, ancient for which there are no dictionaries." That was his magnum opus, was several volumes of thick ancient Chinese manuscripts. He was translating, and he came up to me with this translation that talks about a silver or gold pearl that used to come out of a swamp on a routine basis and circle a village and then go back into the swamp. This was the 11th or 12th century AD. So it goes back quite a ways. For those of you who are sticklers for primary evidence, there's the ancient Chinese text, and I'd be happy to give you a copy of that sometime if you'd like to start working on it, just to satisfy yourself that what I'm reporting is correct. Another interesting case, but I don't think it's UFO related, we get many reports from pilots, commercial pilots, private pilots, all sorts of pilots. This is an example of what we got back in June of 1995. I include it not because it is a UFO related report, but because to show you that we get very high quality reports from pilots. This, I think, addresses a reconnaissance platform that's streaked by a jet airliner. It is estimated that the object covered about 600 miles in under a minute going by the airliner. I'll talk about velocities like that in the very near future. I'm going to be talking about another case in which that type of velocity was seen, and you'll actually see a videotape of the object in a few moments. This is another case, January 7th, 1995. It appears to me that a UFO blew up over McMinnville, Tennessee, Warren County, Tennessee, and it was never covered by the press. Let me show you the evidence that allows me to make that statement. This is a fax that the National UFO Reporting Center received from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, which had been activated as a result of an immense explosion over the McMinnville airport. People from all around the airport allegedly were witness to a cluster, a fleet of objects hovering motionless in the sky, save for the fact that they were seen to be descending slowly towards the earth. Suddenly, one of the objects blew up with an immense explosion, sending fragments of blue-colored burning material high into the sky, which then fell to the earth and was a very dramatic event. The other craft immediately disappeared. We have no idea what this event was, but this is the evidence I have proving to you that the event did take place. This is a cover sheet for the fax that was sent to me by the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency. They faxed to the National UFO Reporting Center the deputy sheriff's handwritten report that details all of the facts that I just cited for you. Very interesting case. This is the deputy sheriff's hand-drawn map showing the locations of all the witnesses whom he interviewed, showing the approximate line of sight for each of the witnesses from his or her respective position on the surface of the earth. Was not covered in the press. I tried. I called the television stations locally. They said they were not interested in covering it. Within 90 minutes of this explosion, I am told by a private investigator, within 90 minutes of this explosion, people who had gone to bed were awakened by knocking on their front door. They were awakened, those who went to the door were greeted by a person who told them that the person was from the government, not specifying the agency. They had had an aircraft blow up, and they wondered if they could go on their property to look for fragments of the object. Next case, the 15th of March, 1995, very dramatic case. That night, I received a report from two United Airlines pilots right here, very close to the Capitol, very close to Washington, D.C. It was a father who had retired from United Airlines together with his daughter. He had just picked her up at the airport after her flight. She was a senior captain as well. They were driving west away from the Capitol, and they saw an object that looked like that, streaked down vertically directly in front of their car, distance unknown, of course. You cannot look at a strange object in the night sky and know how far the object is from you without the benefit of triangulating, that is, looking at it from different directions and recording the direction you're looking. An egg-shaped green and yellow object, And that object, within approximately 20 or 30 minutes after that first sighting, was reported from all of the communities that you see in red here on this map. It was a very, very dramatic night that night. I could do a 3-hour lecture on what happened across the United States that night, but time is running short here, and I would like to move on to a few other cases. It's 20 minutes remaining? 20 to 11 now? I think I have a little extra time. I have a clock up here. We started late. Thank you, Terry. In a moment, I'm going to play some very interesting videotape, what is known as the Canadian or Canada Fireball. Some of you are old enough and computer savvy enough to remember Windows 95. It was released, I remember the date, it was Thursday, the 24th of August, 1995. Well, and they held a big celebration in Redmond, Washington. They had dancing camels, they pitched tents and yurts and so on. But as they were folding their tents that night, an object streaked down across Canada. It streaked across Lake Erie. It streaked down across the western end of Pennsylvania, and it stopped near Breezewood, Pennsylvania. Well, it was a very dramatic night. Moreover, there are reports that as the object streaked across Toronto, fires in wheat fields broke out spontaneously underneath it. That's unconfirmed. But in a moment, you will see some videotape. This is what the object looked like when it stopped just south of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. A very dramatic object, and it was reported from as far east as New York City. This is a written report that we received from a gentleman who had described himself as a physicist. He said he had a PhD in physics, and he described what he saw from approximately 250 or 300 miles east of this object. He saw a perfectly round object strobing like a strobe light, streaking from north to south at a very shallow angle relative to his western horizon. And the reason I know that this gentleman, or strongly suspect that this gentleman is in fact a PhD and a physicist, is it took us 14 months to get his written report. Typical of a PhD. In any event, in a moment, I would like to have the ladies and gentlemen behind the screen here cue a tape entitled Canada Fireball. And while they're dimming the lights, let me coach you a little. What you're going to first see up in the night sky, you will interpret to be a full moon. It is not a full moon. It is the object of interest. Number 2, please note that it is above the clouds. Number 3, please note the strobing. And number 4, watch at the 5:30 position, that is down below the round ball of light, very, very closely, and you will see an object for just a half a second or so streak apparently from ground level up and apparently join with this object. With that, could we please play the tape?
Whatever it was, got residents from Canada to Michigan, as well as some scientists, fired up. John Calplant reports it might have been a meteor shower.
Nothing but a charred skeleton remains of the burned-out mobile home, but it's managed to draw crowds of curious onlookers, the media, and scientists, because of early reports that the blaze was caused by a meteorite. Maddie Jessup is a witness who lives nearby.
I pulled up just after a friend of mine, and she had seen this fireball. She actually saw the fireball, and they followed it right into here. The airport is just about 3/4 of a mile up, and we both thought it was a small aircraft that was coming down. We talked to the Windsor police, and they said somebody had also reported a fireball, so now we're thinking meteorite, you know, possible, very possible.
We're not precluding that it wasn't something from the sky, and we're not precluding that it wasn't arson, so at this point, we don't know.
Okay, did the fire department from Windsor initially say that it was caused by the meteorite? They had recovered something?
No, I have no reports from the fire department at all in my possession.
A professor and a student from the University of Windsor Earth Sciences Department poked through the debris this morning looking for evidence of a meteorite. They used a special device to detect radiation, but they came empty-handed.
Okay, what'd you find in there?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. There's no evidence of any meteorite impact. It doesn't rule out that there wasn't one, but there is no evidence of it. If there was one, it was probably a very small, maybe nut-sized or even smaller, that would still provide the kind of a trace that you see in the sky, but when it hits the ground, it doesn't leave much of a trace on the ground.
A local astronomer tells us 100 tons of meteors pass through the atmosphere every day.
If this was the plane
Thank you.
dropping the flares out, it's going
In
in
summary,
the wrong direction.
the fireball, or whatever it was, that streaked over Toronto, Ontario, over Lake Erie, down across Pennsylvania, and stopped. Sometime, if I come back to the International UFO Congress, I would like to do a 3-hour analysis, a workshop on just this case. It is fascinating. Well, I see my time is running out, so I'm going to start accelerating these slides. I'd like to get through the Phoenix Lights. I'd also like to get to a case that occurred recently in Chicago. I think you'll find it very interesting. Here's another case from November 17th, 1995. This is one of the rare cases, if we could have the slide on the screen, please, one of the rare cases in which two groups of UFOs were seen to converge at a point. Again, it was a Friday night, the 17th of November. Could we have the slide on, please? There we are. Thank you. On that night, an object streaked down the coast of New England. And when I say streaked, people up in York and Kennebunkport, Maine, this flew, by the way, right over the Bush mansion in Kennebunkport, Maine, which may explain a lot. It streaked down the coast. People up there reported that it went from the northeastern horizon, up the coast of Maine, across their heads and disappeared towards Boston, leaving a blue stripe across the sky. And it covered 160 degrees of arc or so in about 2 seconds. That's what they saw. Airliners in the vicinity of Long Island, about 3 dozen airliners reported this incident to the FAA. It was a very interesting case. At the same time this was happening, there was a cluster of 5 red lights that were orbiting around a mountain in Orange, Vermont, and they were seen, scared the daylights out of a woman. She actually left her farm, leaving the hubby and kiddies up on top of a mountain, left her farm to go get a neighbor to look at this. I have all of this on audio tape. Here is my first attempt to recreate the ground tracks of the 2 separate objects. 20 minutes later, 20 minutes after the first object went down the coast of Maine, an object that looked like that, again green and yellow, we have heard that combination of colors before in this presentation already, went down the coast of Maine very slowly and very low to the ground, scared the daylights out of a nurse. This is now about 10:40 p.m. We know the time because the nurse who saw it had left work at 10:30 sharp. Took him about 10 minutes to get to this point in his route home. Well, another case, this is Easter of 1996. A retired U.S. Air Force pilot was watching aircraft take off from Stapleton Airport in Denver, and he was flabbergasted to see an object that looked like a disc with a chunk taken out of the leading edge of it, streaked towards a departing airliner. As it got very close, he thought there was going to be a tremendous collision. Closing velocity, he estimated at 500 knots, almost Mach 1. And at the last instant, the object flipped around the airliner, got on the far side of the airliner, reportedly, then flipped its nose up so it's now vertical, and it accelerated to what the pilot estimated to be 3 times the original closing velocity, and just streaked out of sight into the blue sky. He was flabbergasted. The reason I know he was a pilot is that's his illustration. They don't seem to be able to draw well, but that is the documentation of the report I received. Another very dramatic incident, November 14th, 1997, Friday night, we had a cluster of lights go across the Puget Sound area, and it was so dramatic, so unusual. I got a report from a ship's captain. He had retired as a tugboat captain, And he had mounted in his front yard a ship's binnacle from one of the ships that he had commanded in years prior. He watched these objects go down. He looked at the magnetic compass in the ship's binnacle, and it was just spinning like a record on a record player. Very interesting. Sometime, if I come back, I'd like to do a workshop on this case as well. There is what the objects looked like when they went over Olympic National Park in the western end of Washington. It occurred at 21:07 hours on Friday, the 14th of November. Very dramatic case. That is a hand-drawn version of what a former U.S. Marine Corps forward observer saw as these objects went over his position. He was camped out in the Olympic Mountains. After he had seen this, he broke camp and went back down to his truck and drove home that Friday night. There's another report from Sandpoint, Idaho, where the objects were seen hovering against a mountainside near Kaiser ski area. Very interesting case. Here's another case from April of 1998. You saw this in the Peter Jennings program, UFOs Seen as Believing. You saw some of the witnesses along this ground track of this object that this object made. In brief, an object streaked down from Canada, went right over the head of a former Canadian F-104 fighter pilot, went right over his head, headed south. It stopped about here and hovered for about 10 seconds. It jumped to the west, hovered for another 10 seconds, and then it descended slowly and went across the Bangor submarine base where they keep nuclear weapons. That's what it looked like, allegedly, when it went across Bangor submarine base. And this article, which appeared about 9 weeks later, is what tells me that Bangor submarine base and the U.S. Navy probably succeeded in videotaping that object, because they talk about the sensors that they have planted in the ground around the concrete bunkers where they store nuclear weapons, and the padding of the feet of Canadian geese who fed on the lawns was setting off the sensors. I reason that if they have sensors around those bunkers, does it make sense that they probably have 24-hour video coverage of that very top secret and highly secure area? I think they do. Well, I'm going to briefly go through an account of the Phoenix Lights. I'm going to abbreviate it because I'm running out of time. I'm down to 18 minutes, and Lynn Katai covered that subject very well, but I would like to show you some of the evidence that I accumulated at the National UFO Reporting Center. There is a documentation of the first sighting. It's from Henderson, Nevada, on the southeast corner of Las Vegas. A gentleman saw one of the objects go over his house. It had the requisite number of lights. He said it was immense, and it was headed to the southeast, so it was going in the right direction. Here's another written report we received from another witness. There's a discrepancy in the date with this report that I cannot resolve. The woman assured me it had occurred on the 12th of March, not the 13th, and I asked her, "Don't you mean the 13th Thursday?" And she said, and became indignant, she said, "Mr. Davenport, I was making a birthday cake for my husband, and I know the date of his birthday. It's the 12th of March. So it's one of the many dilemmas that we ufologists face. Here is an artist's rendition, and in a moment I would like to go to the footage I have of the Phoenix Lights and show you the two versions of what happened that night. There were events as early as 8:30, and then later there were events as late as 10 o'clock. I would like to show you both objects that were reported. With that, I wonder if we could go to the Phoenix Lights video, please. And you will see
dropping the flares
the
out.
lights without sound, please, if you would, without audio. You will see the lights that Lynn Katai covered. This is where the debate arises. These were photographed, I believe I'm correct in saying, at between 10 and 10:05 p.m. on that Thursday night, the 13th of March. And these are the lights, of course, that debate swirls around. But again, remember that this is about 10 o'clock, plus or minus 5 minutes or so. In a moment, you will see some video footage, unfortunately not high quality, of 5 lights that constitute
So
one
this
of the
one's interesting.
objects
So in
that
full
went
stack,
over
though, the
Phoenix
one
at
on
a
the
very
left was
low
the first light that
altitude. We
appeared
estimate
actually
the objects
rose
were
from just
between
above
1
the,
and
mountain
2
ridge there.
statute
That mountain ridge is
miles
right close
in
to him,
width.
so it's very,
That will come up here in just a
illusion
moment.
is
There
very
we
dramatic.
have,
That light is,
you
is
can
much, much
probably
farther away,
barely
by
see
20-some
it.
miles.
There are
This
5
is the
lights
only
that are
footage
hopping
of the
around in a
5,
phalanx or
objects
triangular
flying
pattern
in formation.
that are moving,
In fact, you
in
can
this
hardly
case, from
see it at all in the
northwest to
footage.
southeast.
I did an enhancement,
This,
and
I
was
believe, is
used
the
on,
object
Strange
that was
Universe.
intercepted
And
over the
still, it's
home
a
of
very,
Sue
very
Watson.
poor grade
Perhaps
footage, but
many
you
of
can
you
see
have
the
heard
5
her.
lights,
An object that
information.
completely filled
We
the
have
sky.
one
That should be enough
witness
video.
who
Thank you in the
used
back.
I'm trying to get the right thing here.
The
A 30
object
by 80
that Sue Watson
pair of
saw,
binoculars and said that he could see
this
a
is
fuselage
an example of what
underneath.
one of the objects allegedly looked like, to give you some idea of how big this object is, from tip to tip. We estimate that these lights, which were like recessed lights up in a ceiling, is somewhere, the diameter is somewhere between 100 and 200 meters. That is twice the length of a football field. Well, my time is down to 15 minutes, so what I'm going to do is jump ahead a little bit to a case that I would like to share with you that occurred recently. These are some of the photos, some of the slides. I guess we don't have it on the screen. Some of the objects that we're seeing, but I'm going to streak ahead to a case that occurred back in 1999. This is what a sky camera looks like. There are a bunch of them over the western United States. They're manufactured and distributed by Sandia National Laboratories. What you're looking at is a reflective hemisphere about 24 inches in diameter, and on a tripod up above there's a tube that has a camcorder in it. And on the 15th of August, 1999, one of these cameras mounted in Albuquerque captured an event that I would like to play videotape of in a moment. In fact, I'm going to play 3, in rapid sequence, 3 separate clips, video clips, each about 10 seconds long, that shows what Sandia National Laboratories captured on that day. And by the way, you can see here on these slides, these are still frames, 1/30th of a second apart, of an incident that you will see in a moment. And by the way, please note that SNL stands for Sandia National Laboratory, and not, as some skeptics and debunkers have said, Saturday Night Live. No, 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 no. This is what happened. Could we go to the 3 video clips, please, starting with the moon video, a 10-second video that will show you what the moon would look like if it were recorded all night long by one of these sky cameras. That's what the moon looks like, passing across the southern sky as the Earth rotates. Could we go to the next video, please, small meteor? If one of these sky cameras were to capture a small meteor, it would look something like this. This was on the 17th of August, 1999. Please note the illumination of the table that the reflector is sitting on. Now, could we please play the video of the Albuquerque or New Mexico flash? This is what happened that Sunday night to the sky camera. The flash out west of Albuquerque developed, and it completely obliterated the optical system of the sky camera. That flash illuminated approximately 1/4 or 1/3 of the United States for 2.6 seconds. And when you stop to consider the amount of energy it must take to do that, you will realize how immense an event this was. The interesting thing is, Sandia National Laboratory took the position that, well, it's just a meteor. That's all it was, a brilliant meteor. Well, that's interesting because 21 minutes later, the same thing happened over Las Vegas. And I've had witnesses from both of those two incidents on Coast to Coast describing their experience. The interesting thing is I have data showing that the flash that occurred out approximately 60 or 80 miles west of Albuquerque occurred where 3 objects were reported by multiple witnesses to be on a converging course. What happened that night, I have no idea, ladies and gentlemen, but it was a very, very interesting event. With that, I'm going to streak ahead to an incident that I would like to cover before I go to my description of passive radar. This is an incident that occurred last November 4th, and I'm going to close the first section of my talk with this incident. On that Tuesday night, do you all remember what happened on the 4th of November? Election night. At about 21:20 hours, 9:20 that night, Tuesday, the 4th of November, 2008, a young woman was driving her late model Japanese car down a 3-lane road. She was in the center lane, no cars around her, no pedestrians within sight that she remembers, no deer, no elk, no moose anywhere near her. And suddenly, as she was driving down this highway at 45 miles an hour, her car is scooted to the right 1 lane. She had absolutely no idea what could have caused that. She was so intrigued and so concerned the fact that her side mirror was missing, she could not see it, that she pulled off within half a block or a block, got out, and this is what she saw on the side of her car. Well, nobody has been able to explain what could have caused this damage. Now, I cannot certify that this incident is in any way UFO related, but to date, nobody has been able to describe how the metallic doors of a car could be crumpled and wrinkled and pressed in. There is no scuffing. The paint is not broken. It is not chipped. It is not missing to any degree. Now, I include it as well to share with you the fact, share with you the information that has not been released publicly yet. I turned this case immediately over to Mr. Sam Moranto and his wife Julie. Sam is the state director for MUFON for the state of Illinois. I knew that this was when I saw the photos and heard the woman's testimony. I had her on the Jeff Rense radio program shortly after the incident had occurred. I knew it was going to be a very interesting case. Turned it over to Sam for investigation, who did a wonderful job of getting paint chips into a laboratory, pursuing it, interviewing the young woman, interviewing her mother, and so on and so forth. This is the new information, ladies and gentlemen. On the 16th of February this month, Monday, just after Valentine's Day, Sam Moranto called me. I could tell immediately that he was dejected. The woman elected to have this car repaired. The repair station cut out the metal panels in the center of the door for replacement and patched in new panels. On the 16th of February this year, Monday, those panels were stolen. At the same time the panels at the repair station were stolen, a man walked into a university laboratory, identified himself as Dr. So-and-so, I don't know the name yet. He said he was working with Sam Moranto and he had come to pick up the official report of the analysis of the paint chips, and oh, by the way, he would like the paint chips as well. The young woman or person behind the desk unfortunately gave the paint chips and the report to this gentleman. We have yet to find out who he is. Somebody was very, very, very interested in these panels. Well, I have not marshaled my time well, but it's been very enjoyable. I would like to move on now to the second portion and the final portion of my presentation, and we'll leave a few minutes for Q&A, I hope. About 14 years ago, after I had first started as director of the National UFO Reporting Center, I was panicked, ladies and gentlemen. I did not know how I was going to be able to continue at that work pace that I saw during the first 5 months or so of my tenure as the director, and sole employee, by the way. And I said to myself, there must be some hardware, some reconnaissance equipment that would allow us to pick up UFOs, if they're real, pick them up unambiguously, objectively, to everybody's satisfaction, to document their presence. And the next few slides are the result of that realization. I can tell you when this epiphany occurred to me. I used to work in the investment business, the venture investment business, and I had a company come to our company and say, we are seeking investment. That company was Meteor Communications Corporation, a corporation that builds communication equipment to bounce radio signals off of meteor trails. Our atmosphere is struck by about 1 trillion meteors per day, 10 to the 12th power. 1 trillion meteors per day. We get about 10 tons of material accumulating on our planet from these meteors. Well, a company came to us and said, we build this equipment, we're looking for investment. Many years later, it occurred to me that if this company can detect meteor trails, and they also pick up aircraft, and they also reflect radio signals off of migratory birds, what else might this equipment be able to detect? And that is the source of the next few slides that I'm going to show you in the next 4 minutes. We'll show you, I think I'm going to forego the videotape I have. It runs about 3 minutes. It's pretty long, demonstrating the difference between active radar and passive radar. Active radar is what we're all accustomed to at airports, where they have a beam that is generated, a radio beam that is generated by a transmitter, and it is swung around in a circle every few seconds, and whenever the beam passes over a target, say an aircraft, say migratory birds, ducks or geese, they pick up ducks or geese, it illuminates, and the signal illuminates that target with a beam, and the beam is reflected back to the receiver, and that target is registered on a screen that a person is looking at. This documents how early I was in touch with Meteor Communications Corporation. This postmark is in April of 1995. I've been working on this project now for almost 14 years. This is some of the material that the company circulates, some of the advertising equipment or advertising material they circulate. I am not the first to recognize that objects in the sky reflect or can reflect to our advantage radio signals. This is Echo 1, and you can see the simulated radio signals bouncing off the metallic surface of this. Well, in the remaining 3 minutes or so, and I'd like to leave a little time for you so you can take pot shots at me, let me cut right to the chase, and I'll make this my last slide. For the last 14 years, I've been working on accumulating funding to build a passive radar system. A passive radar system capitalizes on the radio signals that are broadcast by commercial radio and television stations, and when they broadcast those signals, as I'm sure you all well know, those signals radiate out in all directions. They radiate out into space and will go forever, for billions of years, unless they strike something up in space. Well, it occurred to me that those radio signals could be used to detect you-know-whats. You-know-whats being unidentified objects. And in point of fact, the Navy has been doing this for approximately 50 years. And this is classified, as made evident by this document dated 1970, dedicated to a seminar in Massachusetts at which they discussed passive radar. Moreover, this is a document taken off the internet, Passive Radar for Air and Missile Defense. It's dated October, or the gathering was dated October of 2003, hosted by John Sarr. You probably cannot read any of this text, but it points out that anybody who wishes to attend this seminar at the Applied Physics Laboratory at the University of Washington in Seattle first has to fill out his security form, a top secret gathering of scientists and military folks. And let me show you my last couple of slides, I guess. This is the facility that the U.S. Navy uses. This is the center of the transmitter. They transmit their own signal up into space. This is the facility from which they do it. That is the antenna in Lake Kickapoo, Texas. And what they transmit is a pane of radio energy, such that whenever anything penetrates it, it reflects a signal back down to the ground, and it can be detected with receivers on the ground. In the very near future, we may have a passive radar system set up that serves the UFO community, but most of all, ladies and gentlemen, will serve your interests. On the 19th of January this year, I was contacted by an individual who understands the significance of my proposal and who is prepared, he asserts, to fund it. Within a year or 18 months, if this funding comes through, we will be able to build UFO detection stations that will settle once and for all the issue of whether we are being visited by UFOs or not. Well, my screen has turned red. My time, thank you very much. My hour has gone by. Thank you so much.
Peter Davenport. Thank you, Peter. All right, we're going to take a little break and be back soon. The show will be rolling quickly. Thank you, everybody.